We're going to continue with this parsha Be'alotcha, with the theme of the menorah. The Or HaChaim says that the Kohen will inaugurate the menorah every day, whereas the princess inaugurated the Mizbeach, the altar, only once. And that's why Hashem says to Aaron, your portion is greater than theirs. But I want to discuss with you the form of the menorah. The menorah needed to have a center light or main light, called the light, the western candle, the main candle. Now, why does the menorah have 7 branches? The Or HaChaim asked the question, why precisely 7? All you need is one light. And so he explains that when you have one light, one light, it's not good to have only one light alone. Doesn't have an aesthetic value. You need to have at least one light on each side. And the reason for this is that if you're going to show that there is a miracle in the fact that this light doesn't go out, it makes sense to have other lights that do go out. So that you can say those 2 lights on the side go out, and this one in the center doesn't. So that's why you need at least in the menorah, at least 3 candles. But once you decide that you're going to have 3 candles, the right and perfect number is to have 7. 7 is a number of great aesthetics, a great beauty. But here the Or HaChaim introduces a fascinating concept. And I want to discuss this part with you. The 7 lights of the menorah. He asked the question, why 7? Why is 7 such an important number? So he says that the menorah represents also the light unto the nations. That in a sense, by all the flames pointing to the center, the middle, means that all the nations direct the light towards the western one. So the middle lamp represent the Jewish people, to show that the Jewish people is a teacher of the world. But let us analyze the math. There are, according to the rabbis, 70 nations in the world. Today we have many other nations and peoples, but 70 is the basic. Some nations are composed of several peoples, several peoples divided into several nations. But there are basically 70 cores of different cultures and peoples in the world. That's what the rabbis say. So if you have 7 candles, 7 branches, that means that each branch represents 10 people, 10 nations. And that's why we have 7 branches to represent the 70 nations, so that the nations turn towards the center, towards the Jewish people. But now I have a question. If the center branch represents the Jewish people, then there are only 6 branches representing the 70 nations. And if you say that each branch represents 10, so then there are only 60 nations. Where are the other 10? So some explains that the center branch represents 10 nations, and the light at top represents the Jewish people, which is a beautiful concept. So that means that 70 nations are turning to the Jewish people, and they learn from them. But you still have the question, how is it possible the 10 nations that are under that main candle are 10 nations? So that means that the 30 nations on one side, the 30 nations on the other side are turning towards these 10 nations. So the 10 nations of the Jewish people are in some way connected. So who are these 10 nations? Who are in the center? And here I want to bring an interesting interpretation. While the Jewish people is the center of morality, the center of culture, the center of goodness in the world, and Torah, and that's what they teach the world. Nevertheless, there are other nations that help the Jewish people's forward marching. And it is possible that, or the other nations will be the first ones to adopt, to come close to the Jewish people. And so that these 10 nations that are in the center branch have a special quality. So while all the nations, in fact, all 70 nations are going to turn to the Jewish people, there are 10 nations that are actually closer to the Jewish people. Now, who those nations are, I'm not going to guess. But maybe history will show us there are 10 kinds of peoples that are close to the Jewish nation. And it is possible, maybe just as a theory, that some of these nations are nations that perhaps some Jews have become assimilated in them. And they are actually, although now they don't realize they're Jews, but there's some Jewishness in them. We've heard of stories of people in India and other places, perhaps that come from the 10 tribes. And it's interesting, by the way, that the number 10 tribes. So it may be that these 10 tribes have become 10 nations. We do not know who they are. But one day, these will be the first 10 nations that are going to come to Jerusalem and support the Jewish people in its redemption. So according to this interpretation, and let me review, if the menorah is 7 branches because it represents the 70 nations, and the central branch is the Jewish people, so there are 30 on one side and 30 on the other, 3 and 3. But what happened to the last 10? So those 10 are also nations, but they're closer to the Jewish people. And perhaps that's why they will be the special nation. This is a fascinating, mysterious, but beautiful interpretation. And once again, the menorah not only represents the Jewish people, but the menorah represents Jewish history, or the history of the world. In the world, eventually, all the nations will turn around. Just like the candles of the menorah facing the middle candle will become the center of the world. The world will become infused with the knowledge of God that the Jewish people have all the time. They will come and ask to the Jews, please come, teach me Torah, because this is what I want to learn. And again, as the prophet says, they will go in the light of the Jewish people and will be Or Lagoim, a light unto all the nations. And that is the story of the menorah.